Chad Hasty Show, News Talk KFYO. Hope you're having a wonderful Monday. Joining us on the phones right now, State Representative Dustin Burrows here on the Chad Hasty Show. Representative Burrows, good morning. How are you today?
Good morning, Chad. I'm fine. Thank you for having me on today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to visit with you. There's a lot of things, a lot of stuff going on in the world to talk about. Before we get into a piece that you had in the AJ, I want to ask you about this defunding the police movement that is now gaining traction within. And honestly, it used to be a fringe idea. It's now becoming more mainstream among the Democrats. I don't know if the Democrats are going to float this idea in the upcoming legislative session, but what are your thoughts on this whole thing?
Well, Chad, don't worry. The city council who decided they're going to abolish their police force also decided they're going to pass a resolution stopping bad things and crime. So everything's going to be okay.
Oh, good. This is going to have signs everywhere, a crime-free zone.
Yeah, in all seriousness, look, this is a bad idea. This is going to be a failed experiment. I feel really bad. There's good people in Minnesota. Elizabeth and I have visited there. They do not deserve what is going to come if they do not have police patrolling their neighborhoods. I hope there's enough time given to them that they can go out and secure firearms and ammunition to defend themselves. But this is really bad ideas.
Well, let's just say, I mean, look, the state of Texas is not immune from liberal ideas in liberal communities. What would happen if a city in Texas were to take a cue from Minneapolis and say, you know what, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to defund and disband our police department.
Well, two things. Those cities probably still wouldn't find a way to lower property taxes, which is insane. But secondly, what I would tell you is I would implore, every opportunity to go defend good Texans from bad crime, whether that means, looking to the county sheriff and other issues or other law enforcement around the state. People need protection. I mean, this is just a core function of government. It needs to be in place. And if you just abolish it, somebody else is going to have to step in and fill the void. We're not going to allow crime rooting in cities to burn down. Yeah.
Let's talk about, again, before we get into your latest piece that you put out in the HA over the weekend, a story that was gaining a lot of momentum, the Texas Municipal League. They were going around telling cities and counties, hey, guess what? You guys can, because there's been a natural or a disaster declared across the state of Texas, you can raise your taxes pretty much by as much as you want without that trigger kicking in. The governor disagrees with that. What do you say about it? Because, I mean, you were right in the thick of this in this battle.
Well, look, I mean, the two bill authors, Senator Betancourt and I, also disagree with it. We have pushed back on that. We do not believe that is the spirit of the law for sure. Certainly, it's also really, really bad policy. And not only, we push back on it from a legal side, but also a political side. You saw him and I both release joint press statements congratulating the city of Dallas for rejecting those failed attempts, talking about what bad policy it is. And let me maybe make a little news this morning for you, Chad. He and I have also discussed the idea of a COVID-19 penalty, that if we have, cities and counties who, somehow get away with jacking property taxes way up during this time, this 2020 cycle where property tax owners can afford it the most, we should probably come back in 2021 and 2022 and force a lower rate to penalize them for having done that. And we've discussed the opportunity. It's not fleshed out, but certainly I think there's a lot of options on the table. And as TML continues to push their narrative and come up with their ideas, we're going to come up with ours.
Yeah, and I have to wonder, because I agree with you. I think the spirit of the law did not mean for this, to be there. When you're a city or county, and I guess this is up to the AG, is that who they have to listen to? Is the Attorney General on this, or who decides what's right?
Well, so look, the attorney general is one avenue. There's also a court system as well. Or quite honestly, they could just listen to their constituents who are truly struggling paying property taxes and decide to not jack up their property taxes in the middle of an economic problem where many of them went out and asked people to, sacrifice with them, and yet they're unwilling to do anything to sacrifice themselves.
Yeah. At the city of Dallas, the city of Dallas was looking at it, and I think they heard enough from their citizens. They backed off of it real quick. Hey, you've got you had a piece out over the weekend, an opinion piece in the AJ, time to reduce dependence on property taxes to fund public education. Talk to us a little bit about what you're meaning here and where you're wanting to go.
Yeah, so let me unpackage this a little bit. This is kind of a follow-up op-ed. So, I've published my first one that dealt with really the counties and cities and other taxing jurisdictions. And, what I reminded everybody of in that first op-ed is those taxing jurisdictions have 100% control of reducing property taxes in their jurisdictions by simply deciding to take in less revenue. I telegraphed in that first piece that it's a little different, obviously, with schools because there's a joint responsibility between how they're funded. That, 55% of school maintenance and operation comes from local property taxes, 45% comes from state appropriations, which is your sales tax, franchise tax, lottery, and other revenues that go into the general revenue fund. For years, in multiple attempts, there has been people who have gone out and wanted to try and take that 55% local property tax funding and reduce it or completely eliminate it. Last session, we actually passed a bill in the House that would have eliminated that by 2022 and forced us, hopefully, to come up with some sort of solution and alternative funding because property taxes, are so unpopular in this state. We also talked about whether, to rely more on consumption tax, and obviously that didn't make it through. So in the interim, the Speaker of the House, Speaker Bonin, asked the Ways and Means Committee to study this issue. Also, House Bill 3 required the Legislative Budget Board to come up with a report on different alternatives to reduce the dependence, and that report will be out in September of this year. We are not meeting as committees right now, so what I have done is I have put together kind of a webinar with Dale Kramer, somebody who started out under Bullock, he worked under Bush and multiple other people, and we're just going to have a conversation about, what are property taxes, what are some of the numbers, and what are the different alternatives that have been discussed, in history and more recently, and kind of the pros and cons. The goal is not to lead anybody or say this is the way it needs to be done if we're going to do it. It's just saying here is the universe of possibilities out there.
Can you hang with us for another segment?
Of course.
Okay, we'll put you on hold when we come back. We'll continue to unpack this and get some of Representative Burrows' ideas on this and more when we come back. Chad Hasty Show, News Talk, KFYO. Back on the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk, KFYO. We continue our conversation this morning with State Representative Dustin Burrows, who, again, you're going to have this webinar, I guess, tomorrow, correct?
Tomorrow, 2 p.m., we're going to be live streaming it through my Facebook page. We've decided if anybody has any questions or ideas to submit them ahead of time or during, and we'll try to answer as many of those as possible. But, certainly if you are interested in property taxes and having a real in-depth discussion about them and revenue alternatives to funding school M&O, you'll find this interesting. If that bores you, it'll be a boring one for you.
Well, and Representative Burrows, you know how this is probably going to work, that someone probably saw your op-ed, they're going to hear the interview, and then they're immediately going to say, you want to defund public education, you want to hurt public education. You know the arguments or the criticism that's going to be out there. What is the real deal behind this? What are you really trying to do? Because public education and everything's going to be under a budget crunch this upcoming session.
Well, so first off, and I think I made it clear in my op-ed, and let me reiterate, the Ways and Means Committee, really doesn't determine how much money goes into public education. We just determine and help determine how it's funded. And what I'm looking at, what we're going to be talking about is the approach to funding, whether there is, enough money, not enough money too much money, whatever your case may be on public education, how you feel, we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to say, here are revenue alternatives to lessen the tax burden out there.
What's a revenue option out there that either has been discussed in some circles, not discussed in some circles? Kind of give an idea of what you are looking for.
Well, probably the one that most people talk about is the consumption tax, the sales and use tax. That's the primary vehicle for the state to raise money and fund its share. We have a rate. That rate could be adjusted. Also, we have exemptions and exclusions within there. Some of them very popular. Some of them have been attacked as being, quote unquote, loopholes or carve-outs. And, anytime you take in $1, through closing an exemption or exclusion, you could potentially drive that into driving down property taxes. And so we're going to talk about some of those, and it's going to be more of, I would say, an academic discussion at this point in time, which is, here is the universe of alternatives. I've asked some of my colleagues to remind me of things that they have heard or think are popular, and we're just going to say, here are kind of the pros and cons. I think the first step in coming up with, any sort of policy is at least to start talking about what all options are actually out there, good, bad, or otherwise.
I don't know if this would apply, but I've seen some of your colleagues and some reporters and opinion folks on social media who have talked about casinos. And as you know, casino gambling, that's something, it seems like it's brought up every session. But with a possible, a possible big budget hit coming up in the next session, this seems to be gaining a little bit more momentum. Is that something that is being looked at for education, or would that be for something that would be for the overall budget?
So let me put it this way. We have had somebody ask that question. Kramer and I are going to talk about that. I will tell you that anybody who looks at, legalizing things such as that in other states, the revenue prediction has always been very difficult and usually has been underwhelming once it's been in there. I personally, from just a, political figure, I'm not for legalized gaming, never have been. I think it does more harm than good. But that being said, those are the type of things that, he and I will discuss tomorrow because they are out there and they are being discussed, and at least let's have, let's make a, honest list of what all is out there and the pros and cons to each.
Yeah, I think when I look at something like casino gambling, if you're going to do something like that, to me, you don't dedicate it towards one. We're not going to fund a public education through casino gambling. To me, that would be almost irresponsible because, it's like the lotto. The lotto was supposed to pay for public education years ago, right? And it never worked out that way. So to me, something like that needs to be if it's going to be discussed, it should be for the overall budget, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. And of course, when we're talking about trying to protect revenues, there's also a societal cost of legalizing gaming.
Yeah.
The major casinos out of Vegas are considered financial institutions, which means they can look at credit history, bank information. When you swipe your card in there, they actually get all that information about each player. And the industry term, at least it used to be, is they look for what's called playing to extinction. Let me repeat that, playing to extinction. So they're looking for what can they do to make sure, whoever it is that has swiped their card and steps up to gamble will basically spend all the money they can get out of them or all their money in general. Well, when you do that, there are societal costs that go with it, and we end up having to do other things. And so part of it, when we have those conversations, we also have to be honest about some of the costs that go with it, both as a society and actually the dollars and cents to basically make it up on the back end.
I think it's a good conversation to have, regarding, the funding of public education. Are you looking at doing any more of these in the future on other portions of the budget?
Well, so I will be having these related to the taxing part of it, right? I'm not actually on the appropriations committee.
Sure.
That's really, on the spending side of it. But, as long as we are still, quote unquote, in the age of social distancing right now. So as long as we're not having committee hearings, there's still work to be done in the interim. And, I will continue to drag the whiteboard out and do some videos and also, have some conversations with experts in the field so that we can continue to have the conversation as we prepare ourselves for next session.
Yeah, very good. Before we let you go, I heard you were at the Lubbock County Republican County Convention over the weekend. How was that?
It was great. We have enthusiastic Republicans out there. They're watching what is going on in this world, and they are deeply concerned. They are going to get out and vote. They are going to get out and vote for President Trump enthusiastically. I think you saw over the last weekend, there's some Republicans who I'm deeply disappointed in that, are trying to now help Biden win in November. I can tell you the local Republicans here aren't them and have no interest in doing that. And, so we've got an enthusiastic crowd. Look forward to it.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't surprise me that the former president George W. Bush is not in favor in favor of President Trump. But you're right. To me, this is an all hands on deck type of election, and even if you don't like the tweets and everything that the president does, I get that. But you got to like the judges that he's appointed in so many of the policies that he's endorsed.
Let me say this. First off, I saw a news report last night that came from apparently President Bush maybe pushing back on that New York Times piece, and I hope that's true. But regardless, there's other Republicans, former close to administration that have come out, and they're now helping Biden. And this is what's frustrating for people like myself and other Republicans. For years and years and years, they ran on and won and showed up at conventions. And they talked to us about how important the courts are and how important life was to them and how important limited government and low property and low taxes are to them. And now all of a sudden, because, maybe they don't think that Trump is modest enough, they seem to have abandoned all of those foundational principles that they once said they cared about. And it makes you question whether they really believed them in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, State Representative Dustin Burrows, that webinar tomorrow at 2 p.m. You can go to facebook.com/Burrows, the number 4TX, to see that. And Representative Burrows, we appreciate your time today.
Chad, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. That's State Representative Dustin Burrows, representing House District 83. Here on the Chad Hasty Show. And again, you can view that webinar tomorrow, June 9th at 2 p.m. On the Facebook page for State Representative Dustin Burrows.